We are back. This afternoon we are with Alicia Zoeller and Kate Preisler from the Office of Community Development talking about a couple of things. And so you know the rules.
I do.
You got it.
Thank you for having me, Mayor. I'm here to present two proposals on behalf of the Office for Community Development. The Office for Community Development felt like it was important that the public also hear about the internal proposals that are currently being considered for ARPA. The first proposal is for $1.5 million in the first year, with $7.5 million total, and these would be for grants for small businesses and for the hotel, travel, and tourism industry. The ARPA legislation specifically calls out economic development, particularly for small business in hard-hit communities, with a lens towards equity and revitalization in downtown areas and areas that traditionally don't see the level of investment as they might expect. And so, like I said, we're requesting $1.5 million in the first year with a total of $7.5 million over the 5 years of the ARPA program. I'm pleased to report that in terms of internal city capacity, the city has retained a new full-time person in the Office for Community Development. That's Kate Preisler. Kate is our new Special Programs Manager, who will not only be managing the ARPA funds and the compliance requirements that go with it, but also ensuring that our other funded programs where we don't have community infrastructure to advance those programs, Kate will be doing that. And the small business and hotel, travel, and tourism industry grants, if it is funded, will be managed by Kate internally in the city of Holyoke so that we can guarantee the business community an efficient, smooth process with one point of contact. We're asking for $1.5 million in the first year with subsequent funding of $6 million in the second tranche of funding because we feel like the $1.5 million will enable us to get our feet underneath us, roll out the program, see how it's working, and then be able to respond to future business needs and industry needs as time goes by. The second request is for a line item for administration and planning. The total request is $1.3 million over the 5 years, and the first year request is for $213,200. This is to ensure that we have the staffing capacity to manage the ARPA funds. As it stands right now, there's no single office in City Hall that has the capacity or the capabilities of managing the ARPA funds. The Office for Community Development has taken on this responsibility in the interim to ensure that the funds arrive here in the city and that we have a program to administer them. But over the long term, we need to make sure that we have the funds earmarked to pay salary and expenses associated with this federal grant program. As many of you may know, the City of Holyoke Office for Community Development receives no municipal financial support. The staff and expenses of the office are entirely covered by the federal grants, the Community Development Block Grants, and the Home Investment Partnership Fund. As additional federal funds arrive here in the city, we need to build out the personnel and the ability to manage those funds, and so that's why this line item is so critical. I would note that of the total $30 million in ARPA funds, at this point we're requesting a total of $1.3 million for the administration and planning. Those expenses will not only go to cover salaries associated with the 4 individuals that will be managing these funds, but it will also go towards expenses like travel, outreach, advertising, telephone usage, as well as a critical role in the internal auditing of these funds. We expect that because of the level of federal funding, we'll have an extensive single audit that will be conducted by the city's external auditor, and those are costs that must be borne by the federal grant program. So we're asking for $213,200 in the first year, and then additional funding for years 2 to 5. I've budgeted a 3% increase per fiscal year for the administration and planning to anticipate increasing costs, particularly those associated with the management of the funds like auditing, and that's how we arrived at the $1.1 million total. I'm happy to entertain any questions, but those are the 2 internal proposals that have come from the Office for Community Development.
Thank you, Alicia. So let me go to the small business and tourism grant. Specifically, do we have a limited amount in terms of what somebody can get? Is it a loan? Is it a grant? And are there set criteria for someone being qualified?
Those are great questions. So right now, the City of Holyoke has had a small business grant program that's been funded through the Community Development Block Grant Program, as well as through the Community Development Block Grant COVID program. That program is to work with small businesses. We're using the federal definition, which is 500 or fewer employees. And the CDBG funds are for businesses that have agreed to either hire or retain employees who are from low and moderate income households, or to businesses that are owned by low and moderate income households. With the ARPA funds, we're not seeing those sorts of limitations in place. So we feel like, pending additional guidance from the Treasury Department, we will be able to open up the small business program to additional businesses and business owners. In terms of the amount of grants and whether it's a grant or a loan, at this point in time, we were offering up to $10,000 in grants to small businesses. That's only because the funding was fairly limited. It appears that ARPA would allow us to increase that threshold, so perhaps looking at a $25,000 or $50,000 investment may be wise, depending on what the business needs are. In terms of whether it's a grant or a loan or a combination, I think it depends on the small business that we're assisting. If our target is to have an equity lens to this and try to assist small businesses that have been shut out of traditional financial markets, we would recommend that we start with a grant. For businesses that have access to traditional forms of financing, we would probably recommend a low interest or no interest loan. That format is important because it means the dollars are invested in the community, but then as the loan payments are made, they come back to the city and they can be reinvested in additional small businesses. So I think depending on the type of business that's seeking assistance and what that business is willing to partner with us on would determine whether or not it would be a grant, a loan, a combination. We can also be creative with the funding, and so things like we would offer you a $25,000 loan, for instance. If you agree to be open on High Street or Main Street for a period of time, we would forgive that loan if you're in business over a certain period of time. The great thing with these federal funds is that it does afford us some flexibility.
Okay, so thank you for that. Let me go into the tourism component, both in terms of tourist attractions, but also in terms of the hotel industry, which would typically have some kind of tourist or economic development aspect to it. So are we also looking to do the same kind of thing for our tourist attractions in the community? And is it the same kind of grant program, loan program?
So I would expect for our hospitality, travel, and tourism industry, we would also be looking at grants or loans depending on what the needs of the individual organization is, how big it is, how they have access to traditional forms of financing, how they've been hurt through the pandemic. Some organizations have had to shut down entirely. Some organizations were able to pivot. I think one of the key things is that we now will have a full-time staff person here in City Hall who will be able to work on a daily basis one-on-one with the businesses, as well as the hospitality, travel, and tourism sector representatives on assisting them in figuring out what are their needs and how do we best maximize the federal dollars. In terms of the hospitality industry, one of the things that I would expect is that there may be facility upgrades that are needed, public health improvements that may be necessary. A facility or a location may be hesitant to open without upgraded HVAC systems, without amenities that would improve and ensure continued public health. So we'd be working with them on those. We certainly want to emphasize with the small business and industry sector grants and loan program the building of a tax base here in the city. The more businesses that are open, the more buildings that come online, the better our tax rate and our tax basis will be. So that will certainly be one of the emphasis. The other portion is certainly we know from the news and from what we've heard in our small business sector that getting people back to work has been problematic. for a whole host of reasons. So one of the things that we want to make sure as part of this program is that if businesses say they need to provide employees with incentives to come on board, or if they need training to come on board, that we make that available. So it could be a tiered incentive program to bring employees on, where the employee gets a sign-on bonus and then some additional funds the longer they're employed. So that's certainly one of the criteria, one of the programs that we're looking at. Also with that, we recognize that daycare and getting families back to work is critical. And so, again, being really creative and thinking out of the box, perhaps an economic development incentive could be daycare slots. So maybe we work with a family that wants to have a home daycare, help them get licensed to create additional daycare slots, and then partner that home daycare with a particular industry or a particular business or a particular geographic region to offer daycare slots so that families can get back to work as well. And it doesn't just stop at daycare. If transportation is an issue, if education is an issue, this is all part of the foundation of economic development, and getting folks out of their homes and into the work sector is just so critical, and I think we're ready and willing to support residents in the city of Holyoke with whatever their needs may be.
Okay, thank you. And so let me just go into I agree with the incentive to try to attract, but also to maintain or to retain the employees that they have and provide opportunity for them as well. Obviously, there's been a lot of comment about people who have stayed in, kept working through, and that if we provide incentives to other people coming in, is that fair to them? So how do we balance that?
I think that one of the things that's an emphasis, I know that one of the things that's an emphasis in the Office for Community Development is providing opportunities for families to climb the economic ladder. And if you or your household have been gainfully employed for a period of time and you didn't lose your job during COVID or through the public health crisis, or you've never lost your job, or you've never been unemployed, then I think for us, that's a certainly fortunate situation. But we have so many families here in the city of Holyoke where we have generational unemployment, generational underachievement, generational undereducation, that we really want families to climb the economic ladder. And in providing a family with a $500 incentive and a daycare voucher to get them out and into the community and working, then in the long term, we have a healthier community all the way around. Children will see their parents going to work. That provides other opportunities in the housing realm to own their own homes, to save for a college education, and to really climb those economic rungs. So I understand that there's a question of fairness. However, the ARPA funds really do emphasize equity, and with equity, it's not a handout, it's a hand up, and putting folks on a level playing field with the resources that we have. And certainly, we're looking at the ARPA funds and what the income qualifications are going to be for some of these programs, and if we need to push back on our congressional delegation to widen the eligibility criteria, we will do that, because we want to make sure that all 30 million is utilized across the community to really raise the entire community and improve its public health as a result of COVID.
Thank you, Alicia. So I'm pretty well set, but let me just go, and if we were to, I'll deal with the small business and tourism. I know it was 7.5 million for the 5 years. Yeah. And I know we've had some money in the small business program with community development. So how much did we have in that last year, or this year?
So right now we have about $90,000 that's available to disperse through the small business program. We were, through pandemic, able to disperse about $75,000. I think our business count through our office today is at about 15 businesses. But I will recognize that there's a level of frustration in the business community. We are partnering with nonprofits here in the city, and like with many entities, we are all struggling with remote work and trying to do this electronically and not in person. And I will be the first to admit that the process wasn't as smooth and as efficient as we'd hoped. Now I think having, like I said, the full-time staff person is going to make a significant difference. We also are going to have one point of contact. So right now we're ready to roll out with about $90,000 in CDBG funds, but the parameters for that funding is very strict and very onerous, and we're hoping that we're going to be able to open up the program a bit more with ARPA funds.
Okay, and one last question. So assuming you got the full funding, best estimate, how many business or tourism industry that you think you could, and or employees that you could have an impact in the first year?
So in the first year with 1.5 million, my target would be 75 businesses. And I'm hesitant to give a number because if we have a business come in and request 100 or 200,000 and it gets a number of people back to work or employed, then I think that would be something the city would go with. But I think our first year, if we could do 75 businesses with some level of assistance, the minimum that we're going to do is about $1,000 unless we're hearing that micro grants like smaller than 1,000 is necessary. So I think if we walked away a year from now having done touch 75 businesses, we'd be doing well. In the short term with pandemic, and doing remotely, scattered among several employees, we were able to do 15.
Okay.
So.
Okay, Alicia, thank you very much. We're wrapping up.
Wrap up.
Thank you for what you've always done. Thank you for your work. Kate, thank you for joining her. And I will see you on the road.
Excellent. Thank you.